Hi guys, Buildzoid here, and today we're going to be going through Gigabyte's Z590 motherboard lineup because, well, for Z490 I did Gigabyte last, so this time they get to be first. And then I don't know who we're probably doing ASRock next, just because their website seems to be finished, and Asus and MSI well, like it makes sense. The CPUs aren't available yet, but yeah, like I want to make these videos now so that they don't get in the way later. So anyway, yeah, let's get into it. Starting off with we're gonna go low end to high end, which I don't normally do because with Z590, like the low end really isn't that bad. Like normally I go from the top to the bottom because by the time we get to the bottom, I'm just kind of like, oh, this is terrible. But this is actually not a bad board. So the Z590UD. So this, I'm not sure on the prices for any of the, well, yeah, I'm not sure about the prices for any of the boards. And also, even if I was given MSRPs, like, you've seen how prices have been behaving recently for hardware. So yeah, who knows if those MSRPs would actually hold up. Though motherboards generally shouldn't be as affected as everything else is, but yeah, so that's kind of that. But this should be well below $200. This is not a, high-end board. I'd assume this is approaching 150, maybe a little bit below that. And it's really not a bad board for that price point because this gets the same VRM that was previously on the Z490 Aorus Elite. So that was like a $200-ish board, and so now we have it on this. The rear I/O is, well, stripped down for this. Well, yeah, stripped down by motherboard standards, but honestly, for this price point, I don't consider this too bad. You still get 2.5 gig LAN on this, and that's 2.5 gig LAN from Realtek. Unfortunately, the specs page is missing. Funny thing is, actually, if we went with the AC version, which all the AC version does is add Wi-Fi, like this is the same board, it just adds a Wi-Fi to the rear I/O, so we'll actually go with this one, because I think... Oh no, the specs page is missing for this one as well. Damn it! Okay, so Gigabyte hasn't finished their website. But anyway, like the thing is, this is the same VRM you had on the Z490 Elite, except now it's on an even cheaper board. This still has a 6-layer PCB, and I know it has a 6-layer PCB because if we look at the full-size image of this, right there is the PCB layer count indicator, and we can see that this is a 6-layer board from that. Fun fact, not all motherboard vendors have layer count indicators. So these are not necessary. Like, so there's a lot of motherboards out there where you can't tell the layer count because it's just not indicated anywhere on the board. But yeah, Gigabyte and MSI and like ASRock, sometimes there's some Asus boards that do it, but Asus most of the time doesn't bother. But Gigabyte and MSI pretty consistently have a layer count indicator somewhere on the motherboard. Not always in this corner, but somewhere on the board there's probably a layer count indicator. What's also kind of neat compared to some of the past Gigabyte low-end boards is this still has troubleshooting LEDs, which, a lot of the time in the lower-end boards, they'd remove those. Which I find really annoying because then like if the board doesn't post, like you don't even know if it's stuck on like CPU initialization or whatever. So that's kind of the thing. So I'm a big fan of having the LEDs. You also get a Q flash button, so you can update the BIOS of the motherboard without even having a CPU. Well, actually, for Gigabyte, I think you do need a CPU. It just doesn't have to be like you don't need a compatible CPU. So like the motherboard doesn't need to be like you can flash the BIOS of the board without having like a supported BIOS on it at the time. So that's pretty neat. VRM heatsinks look actually like I kind of prefer these heatsinks to what the Z490 Elite has, though I'm not sure if they look better. I'm not sure that they actually work better. Either way, this VRM will need some amount of airflow if you're going to run one of the, if you're going to run like a 10 core or the upcoming 8 core, because the 11900K, yes, it's only 8 cores instead of 10, but those cores are a lot bigger than they used to be. So they're also, like, per core power consumption is up because the cores are bigger and it's not like they're on a new manufacturing process. But even then, within the limits of what the, like it's still 14 nanometers, so it's unlikely to pull significantly more power than a 10900K because the 10900K is already very much at the limits of what is coolable. So yeah, this should be like perfectly capable of running a overclocked 11900K if you just give it some airflow. And the cool thing about this actually being the same VRM as the Z490 Aorus Elite, or at least most of the same VRM, is that the voltage regulation of this VRM is actually really good. because I've tested another Z490 board with this like same 12+1 phase VRM using the same ISL 69269 voltage controller with the 50 amp power stages, and it does a great job of voltage regulation. Like, honestly, it's kind of ridiculous how good low-end motherboards have gotten recently. Like, yes, this will still run warmer than the high-end ones, but in terms of, like, you shouldn't see a chip that does, like, I don't know, 5.2 gigahertz on a top-of-the-line board. It should still do 5.2 gigahertz on this. Maybe with, like, a smidge more voltage. And when I say a smidge, I mean, like, 10, maybe 10, you know, somewhere between 0 and 20 millivolts more, because if there's a difference in the voltage regulation between the low-end Gigabyte boards and the high-end Gigabyte boards on Z490, my oscilloscope can't measure it. So, or at least my test setup isn't capable of measuring it. I have some ideas for some adjustments I want to make, but I'll do that after I finish up my... well, after I've done with all the Z590 testing, because right now I want the Z590 and the Z490 results to be comparable. And so I can't change test methodologies if I want to be able to compare the results. So yeah, this is like, you know, if you're going to be doing a sort of basic Z590 build, I'd go for this. Like, what's also cool is, like, you still get 3 M.2 slots on this board. Like, yeah, this is a very solid motherboard. Like, one of the biggest, like, the only major sacrifice, I guess, and it's not really a major sacrifice, is, like, you get 5 SATA ports instead of 6. You still also get the internal Type-C connector, which, yeah, it's like, I'm surprised that this is, like, I'm really surprised that we can have a board like this now as, like, the lowest, like, that's at the bottom of Gigabyte's lineup. There's nothing below this, and it's like, why doesn't this suck? Because normally when you get to the bottom of the product stack, it's like, whoa, this functions? I'm surprised this even runs. This is actually extremely solid from what I can see. So, yeah, I'm impressed with this. So anyway, so that's the UD, and yeah, there's a Wi-Fi and a non-Wi-Fi version. The non-Wi-Fi version is probably going to be like $10 cheaper. So that's kind of that. Then we get the Gaming X. The Gaming X is basically the UD with some minor upgrades. And by minor upgrades, I mean you get bigger, what looks like bigger VRM heatsinks. Same power delivery system. I think they upgraded the power stages. Yep, it's on 60 amp power stages instead of 50s, so it's going to run slightly cooler. You still get the troubleshooting LEDs. You get some, I guess, RGB highlights on the PCB, which is just like, well, that doesn't change anything. 6 SATA ports now instead of 5. You still have Q-Flash. Of course, you still have Q-Flash. Gigabyte has that in their entire lineup now. This is kind of the... like, it's kind of annoying when you have a feature that's just present across an entire motherboard vendor's lineup, because it's like, it's not worth really talking about anymore, because it's on everything. Right? So it's like, even though there's other vendors that might not have that feature, like, at all sometimes, right? So it's kind of like, it's just like, yeah, you buy a Gigabyte board, this comes as standard. Whereas on some other vendors, this isn't necessarily as common, especially on the low end. So anyway, yeah, so this is basically a slightly upgraded version of the UD. They don't currently have a Wi-Fi version of that board listed on their website. I'm assuming there's gonna be one, because it's not like the rear I/O doesn't have space for the Wi-Fi header. This adds Type-C, so that's kind of neat. And I guess you get a slightly better mix of USB ports, still 2.5 gig LAN. And this one we actually have the specifications page for, so that's what I'm basing the Realtek thing on. Yeah, so this uses Realtek, so the UD obviously is going to use Realtek as well. So we get up to the top. So yeah, that's kind of that. In terms of, I don't think they specify memory overclocking support yet. Yeah, they don't quite yet. It is on a 6-layer PCB, and it does have the full, like, memory trace shielding, because you can't see any of the memory traces. So I'm going to assume this is going to have very similar memory overclocking capabilities to, you know, your higher-end Z590 boards, because they're all on 6-layer PCBs as well. The thing is, I guess I could request a review sample of this board, but on the other hand, I don't really want to, like... the thing is, there's a lot of motherboards out there, and I don't really, and it's not like I don't have enough to do as is, and I kind of feel like if I ask for even more boards, I'm not going to get around to testing it, you know, like, not properly. So it's kind of like, yeah, I'd be surprised if this wasn't fully capable of hitting the same memory speeds, but I also don't want to spend time on confirming that. So yeah, that's not great. Though I assume once we get QVLs for these boards, it'll be just a matter of checking if the QVL of this lines up with a QVL of some other higher end board, and if it does, then it's like, well, that answers if the memory topology is the same or not. Anyway, oh, and then I guess the only other change is like, oh, you get an extra M.2 heatsink, which, as far as I'm concerned, is basically like a lot of your high-end M.2 drives just come with their own heatsinks anyway. So these are really pointless in my opinion, but sure. So yeah, so this is also a like I'm not sure I would necessarily go for this over the UD because I don't feel like there's a significant enough difference between them. Like the UD already looks really good, and this is just some minor upgrades to the board from that. So yeah, but still, like, you know, if for whatever reason you prefer the feature set of this board, then get this board. It's really that simple. Again, I don't know what the price is. I would assume this is still under $200, but maybe this is at $200. I'm not sure. Anyway, moving on, we get the Z590 Aorus Elite. And so now we get a matte black PCB. So yeah, the board looks better. Still got troubleshooting LEDs, still got Q flash. Rear I/O looks more USB ports, so very much approved by me. Still on the 6-layer PCB, 60 amp power stages. So this is actually like the same VRM that you'd get on the Gaming X, but now they have an even bigger VRM heatsink for it. If we get to the thermal, well, yeah, you can see that now this VRM heatsink goes all the way over the rear I/O. And also, like, so interesting thing about this style of heatsink design where you have the fins cut in horizontally like this doesn't work if you lay down the motherboard flat, right? Because if you lay the motherboard down flat, hot air just sort of gets trapped in between those fins, and it just kind of stays there because it's not like it's going to go through the solid block of metal. But in a like in a normal, you know, case orientation, this should work quite well as a VRM heatsink. So yeah, this gets a somewhat better VRM cooling system compared to the Gaming X. Now, this also claims XMP support up to 4800, which I find kind of interesting in that the other 6-layer boards from Gigabyte, or at least the higher end ones, claim support up to 5000, which is like, but I'm pretty sure the topology is the same. So they might be sandbagging this right here. I will actually be getting one of these boards to test as a review sample. So yeah, we'll see if there's a, I already have the Pro and the Master, and I will be getting an Elite eventually, so I'll see if there's any difference between the Master and the Elite in terms of memory overclocking, because I suspect there isn't. I really don't think there should be a difference, because as far as I can tell, it's like the same, like, I'm assuming it's the same memory topology, because they all use 6-layer PCBs, so why would you redesign the memory layout if the PCB, you know, if you have the same layer count available? Anyway, so it's kind of that, really. Like, this board doesn't really, yeah, there's no, like, this isn't like a massive difference compared to the Gaming X. I guess the Gaming X might be a bit more expensive than I expected then. But this is supposed to be around $220, and then the big difference is that this does come with a Wi-Fi AX option, which, you know, that's Wi-Fi 6. So, yeah, and that's going to be, again, slightly more expensive, so it's kind of that. I guess it also gets a different audio section, right? I don't pay too much attention to onboard audio because I don't use it. And also, it's one of those things that, as far as I'm concerned, you'd have to actually just test if the audio section is like if the board's onboard audio is good. So yeah. Anyway. So this also looks like a very solid option, but it's kind of like I'm not sure. Like, it really depends on the prices, because I feel like Gigabyte is going to have a bunch of boards that are like $10 to $20 apart from each other, right? Like, you're going to have the Elite, which is extremely similar to the Gaming X, which is already very similar to the UD boards. It's like, so what's the price gap going to be between all of these? Because it's kind of like they're very interchangeable as a result of that, in my opinion. So that's going to be interesting to see how that works out. Anyway, moving on, I guess let's do the Aorus lineup first. So Z590I Aorus Ultra. I feel like I think we should stick to the ATX boards initially. It makes more sense from a progression perspective, right? You go through the ATX boards, then we do the ITX board, and then we do the Vision boards, because they're supposed to be like a different, separate lineup. Yeah, so the Elite boards look good, and I'm going to be testing one of them. Now we get to the Aorus Pro AX, and so this board does not look like it's... What? That's not the Pro AX. That's the wrong image. There. Why do they have this board? That's not the Pro. That's the Master. Weird. Anyway, this is what the Pro AX looks like. So Gigabyte's got to go fix their website. Yeah, they should really go fix their website. Or at least I think that's kind of misleading to have a picture of the Master up here when we're looking at the Pro AX. Anyway, so now you get M.2 heatsinks everywhere, but you still get... Wait, this has 4 M.2 slots. Oh, neat. So yeah, if you like M.2 slots, this has 4 of them. I kind of think this is like the only board where they did that. Like, I don't think they have 4 on the Master. Or have I not been paying attention? No, it says 3. This has 4. Why? How? What? Okay, and this is the part where you go to the manual, because I would love to know how that's implemented. Oh, whoa, it really does have 4 M.2 slots. And this is like... The manual is better than the marketing materials, because, yeah, here you can clearly see. So they have one coming directly off of the CPU, then they have another one coming off of the CPU, and another one... What? This one's off of the chipset. Okay, there's going to be a block diagram somewhere. Okay, so you have Wait. Oh, I don't like that. Anyway, so what they're doing is you have one M.2 slot, like, so with the 11,000 series CPUs, you're going to be getting 4 PCIe lanes dedicated to the first M.2 slot on the Z590 motherboard. So that's your M2A CPU slot right there. Now, what Gigabyte came up with for the Pro AX was, hey, what if we take our PCIe switches and we just take, because the CPU is going to have 16x, and like it has X16 and X4, right, coming off of the CPU. And so what if we take X8 from that X16 and convert that into more M.2 slots, which is exactly what they've done here. So you get 3 M.2s attached directly to the CPU, which is, and those are all PCIe 4.0, which, like, honestly, like, this sort of brings, this is similar to what you have on some of the B550 boards. The thing with doing this is, like, your bottom 2 PCIe slots go through the chipset. Yeah, those go through the chipset. There's not a lot of lanes available to them. But, yeah, if you wanted a board where you just want to stack M.2 SSDs and you don't care about running your... Because the thing is, like, as soon as you install... Like, as soon as you use up 2 of the... Like, any of these CPU-attached extra M.2 slots, like, it's going to drop your PCIe X16 down to X8 because you can't run X12. X12 is not a thing. So... as long as you don't mind running your GPU at X8, which honestly isn't a big deal. Like, even right now with, I think, the... Like, let's just go to Tech Power Up and pull up a 3090, because they did a PCIe... PCIe... Yeah, so 3080 PCIe Express scaling, and you go to the performance summary, you can see that the difference between PCIe 4.0, you know, X16 and PCIe 3.0 X16 is basically non-existent. And PCIe 4.0 X8 has the same amount of bandwidth as PCIe 3.0 X16. So basically, like, this is a pretty reasonable trade. There's not currently any GPU where running X8 is going to significantly lower your performance. And as a trade-off, you get way more M.2 SSD support than with a lot of other boards. So that makes the Pro AX very interesting. Not really the kind of thing I look for in a motherboard, but apparently normies like M.2 SSDs. So if you like M.2 SSDs, bam, this board's got all of the M.2 SSDs. I don't really think you could actually... Actually, no, you could probably go all the way up to 5, because normally the chipset has two M.2s attached to it. So this isn't the limit, but it's very close to it. If you had 5 M.2s, then there'd be like one PCIe slot on the entire motherboard. So, yeah. Um, so, anyway, so that's kind of the main feature of this board. Other than that, the VRM's got 90 amp smart power stages, 6-layer PCB again. So I wonder what they claim the memory support is on this. Oh, this one supports 5,000 apparently. I am going to be I'm very interested in testing like comparing that between the Elite and the higher end boards, because I'm pretty like I'd be very surprised if the topology wasn't the same on all of these 6-layer PCBs. It's just like, why would you make different layouts? Anyway, so this has 90 amp smart power stages, more surface area in the VRM heatsink, also, well, more efficient power stages. So this VRM should be getting very close to the point of once you get to around like 14 and 16 90 amp smart power stages, the VRM heatsink is there more for aesthetic purposes than for actually cooling the VRM, because even if you're running like 360 watts into the CPU, the VRM is so efficient, it doesn't produce enough heat to need the heatsink. As in, if you take the heatsink off and you just run Prime 95 for like hours and hours and hours, it doesn't really, like, it doesn't matter. Eventually the PCB reaches like an equilibrium temperature and then it just sits there. And that happens to be around sort of 90-ish degrees, at least on the 16 power stage versions of this VRM. So, basically, so with something like this, it would probably hit equilibrium at slightly over 100. But yeah, like the heatsink's mostly there for aesthetic reasons at this point. And that's with zero airflow, and no heatsink and just hammering Prime 95. So yeah, this board is going to be more than capable of maxing out any of the top 11th gen CPUs or 10th gen CPUs, right? Z590 still supports 10th gen, though if you use 10th gen, you lose the first PCIe slot. You do get the 3 M.2s still though, because these are hanging off of the CPU. These two are just hanging off of the PCIe lanes of the CPU. They won't be 4.0 anymore, right? Because if you're on a 10th gen, you don't have PCIe 4.0 support. But yeah, anyway, that's kind of that. So that's cool about the board. Where was I going with this? Right, you still get Q-Flash functionality, because of course you do. I really like the rear I/O. Tons of USB ports. I'm a sucker for USB ports. Gigabyte knows I'm a sucker for USB ports. That's why their rear I/O. Like, the thing is, Gigabyte. I know for a fact that Gigabyte watch my videos. So me praising Gigabyte motherboards is kind of like, well, they've evidently just made a list of things I like, and then they just go and check it off as we move up the price tiers. They just check off more things on the list of things I like. Like, it's hard to complain about motherboards that seem to be designed to your own rating criteria, So, yeah. So yeah, I'm a big fan of the rear I/O. The VRM on this is going to be great. Is there anything worth talking? Oh yeah, they still have the tantalum capacitors. There's not anywhere near this many of them on this board. There's only like 2 of them in the socket. It's actually really interesting because on Z490 they went really heavy on the tantalum capacitors in the socket. Like the socket would be just tantalums. And then on the low-end boards, you'd just get multi-layer ceramics. But with Z590, at least the boards I've gotten so far, there's actually a mix of like multi-layer ceramics and tantalums all for the output filtering. And the thing is, on Z490, again, I couldn't really measure a difference with my oscilloscope. Maybe because my oscilloscope's not good enough. Maybe my test methodology just isn't good enough. But yeah, I couldn't measure a difference between the various Gigabyte Z490 boards. So I guess they're like... I guess maybe Gigabyte has a better test for this, or just more sensitive equipment, and so they're further optimizing the use of the pulse caps. Because yeah, I find it really interesting that it's like, because the Z490 configuration worked just fine, and then it's like Z590 they've shuffled it around a bit again, and it's like very interesting, very very interesting. So. Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think I'll be able to measure any difference even now. So that's kind of the I'm kind of annoyed about that. That's one of the reasons why I'm kind of considering coming up with a more aggressive test methodology, maybe. Because it's like when you have the, most expensive board performing basically the same as one of the cheaper, like one of the really like more cost optimized boards, it's like, is my testing method just not sensitive enough? Probably. Um, but anyway, so yeah, this just looks like an all-around solid board. The only thing I can complain about is there's no postcode on it, right? Like you're still just stuck with the troubleshooting LEDs. But yeah, other than that, the feature set of this board is extremely good. The VRM is great. Like, and this is supposed to be just under $300. So it's gonna be we're gonna see where it ultimately ends up. So somewhere around $300, depending on how things work out. But yeah, this looks like a very, very solid board. And then again, if you're a fan of M.2 SSDs, then this is one of the few boards to support 4 of them, because it's not natively supported by the Z590 platform. That's Gigabyte, stealing CPU lanes to produce more M.2 slots. So yeah, that's kind of that. Moving on to the Z590 Aorus Ultra. Now, I really like this board. I'm not sure what it's going to cost, but I really, really like it because it has a postcode. Also because it has like the same VRM that we had on the Z490 Aorus Extreme. It's the 16+1, and yeah, you get a postcode, a power button, reset button, Q flash. So like at this point, this is basically the Pro AX, but for overclockers, and it goes back down to the reasonable M.2 configuration instead of the crazy one. I'm not sure about that. I mean, personally, I prefer this because this way you get SLI support because you get X8 and X8. And then at the bottom you have the last slot should be going off of the chipset and X4. So if you want multi-GPU setups, this is the better motherboard. But yeah, like for a lot of people, having the 4 M.2s, I guess, is more interesting. But then I guess also a lot of people who primarily want 4 M.2s probably don't care that much about overclocking. So they're not going to miss the postcode that much. But yeah, the postcode is freaking awesome for overclocking. Then, of course, you get the power button, reset button. VRM on this is just mega overkill, right? 16+1, 90 amp smart power stages. This is the kind of VRM where you can literally take off the heatsink. It just doesn't matter anymore at all. Heatsink is completely optional, though this is also, I think, one of the highest surface area heatsinks that Gigabyte runs on the Z590 boards. So yeah, instead of the VRM running, at acceptable temperatures, it's going to be running extremely cool. Rear I/O is very solid, right? 2.5 gig Intel LAN. Actually, already on the... Oh, wait, the Elite was still on Realtek? I was wondering if that was one of the differences. Okay, wait, no. Yeah, so this is still on Realtek, but the Pro, I believe, switches over to Intel. So this gets you 2.5 gig from Intel. The Pro is on Intel 2.5 gig, yeah, because the Pro and the Ultra are very, very similar. Like the Ultra is basically the Pro, but more overclocking focused. So yeah, this is kind of like this board. Honestly, is in a lot of ways better than the old Z490 Master. Even though this is like the lower tier because it's an Ultra, it's not like the Master goes above the Ultra board in Gigabyte's lineup. But yeah, this has like the VRM's bigger. Not that the VRM on the Z490 board was inadequate. It's just kind of like Gigabyte saw fit to make it bigger for the Ultra this time around. We've still You've now got a postcode. On the Z490 Ultra, you didn't have the postcode, which I thought was really stupid because the Ultras for a while would have postcodes, and then for Z490 there was just like no postcode, which was kind of dumb. But yeah, the postcode's back. So I'm assuming this is going to be somewhere around $350 for this board, and it is loaded. Like honestly, even if you're me, there's very little reason, in my opinion, to go for the Master instead of this. So, yeah, but speaking of the Master, let's take a look at the main difference with the Master, right? So, like, because the rear I/O on this is already extremely solid. Internally, like, as far as I'm concerned, this already does everything a motherboard needs to do. And so with the Master, Gigabyte was like, so, 2 more power stages. Because, like, already with this VRM, they had to start using doublers because the ISL 69269 does not go up to 16 phases. It only goes up to 12. But anyway, so this is running 8 plus 1 and then doublers on the 8. This is running 9 plus 1 and doublers on the 9 so that you get up to the 18. So yeah, this VRM needs the heat sinks even less. Again, just the heat sinks were already very optional on the Ultra. Now they're more optional. And they've stuffed a fan into the rear I/O for cooling the which as far as I'm concerned, that's just completely bloody pointless. You get a nicer power button for next to the postcode. The reset button moved. Did it move? Yes, reset button moved. It's down here now. Oh wait, they have a BIOS safe. Oh man, did they have safe mode? Oh man, okay, I need to really mess around with that. Because that was one thing I pointed out to Gigabyte, that it would be neat if they had safe boot. And wait a minute. What does that let's go to the manual. Yeah, so this is a like top 10 tricks for figuring out boards is like if you have a board that you're very interested in. Oh no, it is just a regular reset switch. How boring. Anyway, we're just going to go to the manual at this point because the manual is way more effective at informing you about things you actually care about. Okay. We need some zoom on this. Oh, no, it's labeled reset switch. Keep scrolling. Reset switch multi-key functionality. Set this button to boot on safe mode. Oh, wait, do I have to... What page is this on? 58, damn. Actually... Oh, this one also has that. Really? They have it on the Ultra as well? Oh, man. That just makes this board so much better. Oh, okay, I need to... So I'm gonna... Oh, man, that's awesome. That is so cool. Like, I need to test if that actually works properly, because it's possible to have a safe boot button that doesn't work quite the way you'd expect it to, but if that does what I hope it does, then man, that just makes Gigabyte's that makes the Ultra so much better for overclocking. Like, oh man, that is awesome. That is literally the most exciting feature for me on Z590's on Gigabyte's Z590 lineup, because man, it makes your life so much easier when you don't have to worry about saving BIOS profiles. So yeah, that's super cool. So anyway, back to the key features, and they don't even mention it in the marketing material for the Ultra. So I'm gonna, like, it's in the manual. I'm gonna assume that whoever writes the manual probably like the documentation is probably done with more care than the marketing materials, right? Because it's not mentioned here. Like, it's just kind of, yeah, it's not mentioned at all. Unless I'm missing something, but I don't think they're Yeah, no, this just doesn't seem to... Yeah, they just don't mention it on the Ultra. Whereas I would consider that like the most... I guess the thing is, it is a very overclocking centric feature, but it's like, it's so awesome. If it does what I hope it does, then man, that is like the best addition to this motherboard ever. Also, what do they have for thermal guard 2? Okay. Oh, so there's no backplate on this. Oh, well, whatever. That doesn't matter that much. Anyway, so yeah, so that makes the Ultra a lot cooler in my opinion. If like having safe mode is just so like that is so useful. I'm trying to figure out like I'm kind of annoyed if they haven't, like, yeah, I guess they really just don't find it that cool. Though I think it's literally like the best part of this board. So that's exciting. Anyway, Aorus Masters. So I do actually already have one of these. So as I mentioned, VRM on this, more powerful, multi-key with safe mode button, like safe mode button. Man, that's so cool. 10 gig of Quantia LAN, no other LAN options on this board, which I think that's a very sensible way of doing things. Like just getting 10 gig, and because it used to be that the Master would have like 2.5 gig and 10 gig, and it's just like, well, you know, how many people are actually going to take advantage of having dual LAN? So instead, now you just get the 10 gig on a cheaper board, which is pretty neat. Also, this VRM includes way more tantalum capacitors than all of the boards below it, right? You've got those 3 tantalums over there. I think there's some more of them on the back. I can't remember right now. And then there's a couple of them in the CPU socket as well. So that's pretty neat. This VRM is just completely excessive, right? With the 1890 amp smart power stages. One of my favorite features about this board is this actually has a very large backplate. I'm not sure. And a pretty rigid backplate at that, except I can't find where they mention it. But yeah, so the reason why I like the backplate is it makes the board a lot more, like it improves the structural integrity of the board quite a bit. So you're less likely to break it while like installing it or something, which, you know, if you're careful and you know what you're doing, it's unlikely that you're going to break a board by just installing it in a system, but accidents happen. And, you know, it's nice if the board is just harder to break in general. So, yeah, this board has a backplate. It's also used for sinking some of the heat from the VRM, but that's not really its primary purpose. And yeah, so, you know, power button, voltage read points on this, which I don't believe the Ultra had the voltage read points. Yeah, no, this doesn't have the voltage read points. So yeah, the Master gives you some voltage read points, postcode, which we've already had. Still only 3 M.2 slots. It looks like the 4 M.2 slots thing is exclusive to the Pro AX. You get Q flash and clear CMOS on the rear I/O, which is pretty neat. So yeah, I really like this board, and this thing is going to be. I think I'm not sure what it's going to cost, but I'm assuming it's going to be somewhere around $400 to $450. Especially considering how good the Ultra is now, it kind of makes sense to shift the Master up in price point, because if they're right next to each other, why would you, like, you know, there's like a bit, it kind of feels like there's a little bit too much overlap between the two. But yeah, so the Master is just kind of like this is the last board in Gigabyte's lineup that still makes sense, in my opinion, because then, of course, we get to the Aorus Extreme. And I'd already say the Master is very excessive, especially considering that, like, the Ultra has the postcode, right? Like, if you're into overclocking, I see very little reason to not just get an Ultra and stop there, at least in Gigabyte's lineup. I don't know how, you know, it'll compare, like, if there's any other boards out there that'll sort of beat this on the feature set, but, yeah, right now in Gigabyte's lineup, I think the most, my favorite board so far is, like, the Z5, like, from a more normal perspective, the Z590 Aorus Ultra. Because the thing is, Gigabyte, there's one board that's missing from Gigabyte's website right now that's actually probably gonna be my favorite Gigabyte motherboard of a very long time. But yeah, they've not announced it yet, and it's super overclocking focused, and I can't wait to get my hands on it, but they're still working on like making it as good as it can possibly be. So that board is lagging behind the rest of their lineup because, yeah, they're making it even better. So I'm super excited for that one, but that one's not in the lineup yet. So out of what's been announced so far, I think the Ultra is sort of the most interesting board that Gigabyte's doing for Z590. And then the Master is just kind of like, if you really want the 10 gig, I guess, go for it. Because otherwise, there's really not many downsides to the Ultra as far as I can tell, or any downsides. Like, yeah, sure, the VRM on this is going to run somewhat cooler because there's a freaking fan on it, but yeah, not much reason to go above the Ultra, in my opinion. So next we get the Aorus Extreme, and this thing is just kind of like, How much stuff can we still put onto the board? So this thing's going to be in excess of $700. It might hit 800. I really don't think anybody should be buying this. Unless you're like a massive Gigabyte fanboy, I guess. Right, like this board is very much in the territory of motherboards that come with monoblocks, which I find monoblocks even more more annoying because it's just like, why would you sacrifice CPU cooling capabilities for cooling the chipset that doesn't care and the VRM that cares even less? But anyway, yeah, so the main addition with this board is you get Thunderbolt 4 built in, but there's other boards in Gigabyte Z590 lineup that also do that, and they cost a lot less. You get 10 gig LAN built in, you get 2.5 gig LAN built in. Also, I am getting a review sample of this board. But considering like what they've done with them, like the Master already gives you the 10 gig LAN. It doesn't give you the Thunderbolt, but anyway, I'd never cared about Thunderbolt functionality that much, so... or the 10 gig LAN for that matter. I only have 1 gig in my place, so yeah. To me, basically, it's just like as long as it does 1 gig, I kind of don't care. But anyway, you know, this board sets out to just have everything, which is why you get the 2.5 gig and the 10 gig, and why you get the Thunderbolt and all of the USB ports and the Q Flash and the Clear CMOS and the Wi-Fi 6. The VRM has 2 more power stages than what you get on the Master. Not because they actually do anything, just because they needed a bigger number to advertise, right? Like it's so how do we make the Extreme look better than the Master? Just 2 more power stages. Will they actually achieve anything? No, but 2 more power stages. It's more than 6. Like 20 is more than 18. You can't argue with that. So yeah, this is on 20 power stages. It's got I think the number of tantalum capacitors in this VRM is the same. But this has a slightly different layout for them. Also, this motherboard cover that they have, like, let's scroll back up. I hate this, like, laggy scrolling that these fancy websites have. It's so annoying. Anyway, this cover all over the motherboard, that's entirely made out of aluminum. Most motherboards would make that out of plastic, which I actually think is the far more reasonable way of doing that because it's a cover. It doesn't help with it doesn't improve cooling. It doesn't even add any structural rigidity to the board because this thing comes with a beast of a backplate. And so the backplate, like, yes, this does technically make it even less bendy, but the backplate already makes the board so rigid that I don't think the front cover is particularly helpful or necessary. But yeah, the front cover is just entirely made of aluminum, which is a part of the reason why this board is so damn expensive because... well, that's a big block of metal, and metal is, of course, far more expensive than plastic. So, sure, it doesn't actually offer any functional purpose, but it does add manufacturing cost, and I guess it looks nice, which is the primary reason that it's done. Also, the board is EATX, so watch out for case compatibility, because this thing is wide, and then the 24 pins at an angle, so your biggest power connector is going to stick out way out the side of the board. Did I mention the Master has dual BIOS? I think, well, if I didn't mention the Master has dual BIOS, it has dual BIOS. It also has the switches for controlling which BIOS you're on and for disabling the automatic dual BIOS functionality. The Ultra does not have dual BIOS and it doesn't have the switches either, so that's fine. Right? Like if you don't have the switches, then don't have dual BIOS. If you do have switches, then sure, dual BIOS is a nice feature to have. The Aorus Extreme, of course, has that as well. It's hiding under the cover over here. I've got voltage read points. This is on an 8-layer PCB instead of a 6-layer PCB, but at least on Z490, that really didn't make a difference in terms of memory overclocking capability. Like the Extreme and the Master, for me, clock the same. There's a decent chance that's also because my CPUs, like both my 10700K and my 10900K have potato memory controllers that just barely do 5 gigahertz. So, it might just, like, the board might actually be better. It's just my CPU can't take advantage of it. So yeah, that's it's kind of that. Like the thing is, this board is just like there's like it's a Master, it's just bigger and more expensive. Oh, and I guess you got Thunderbolt built in. That's basically what this board is. So yeah, I mean, And the funniest thing to me is that this is not even going to be Gigabyte's best overclocking board because of the motherboard that they haven't posted on their website yet. So, yeah, but this thing is just kind of like it does the most of everything. That's the whole purpose of this board, is to just have everything in excess. And it's pretty pointless in my opinion, which is why for Z590 I decided to go, you know, from the budget boards to the expensive boards, because like the Ultra and the Master are, in my opinion, just great boards that do everything you could like. Or the Ultra already does basically everything I could ever ask for from a motherboard, and then we get to the Master and it's like, okay, so you know we have some little extras like the dual BIOS and the 10 gig, and then we get to the Extreme and it's just like, so there's a bunch of stuff on this that I would never use. Like the Thunderbolts and the dual LAN and, well, the big aluminum cover that doesn't do anything. Which yeah, though I am a fan of the backplate. And if there's a image of it. Yeah, so this backplate is great. And the reason why it's so good at improving the rigidity, like, first of all, it covers almost the entire back of the board, so it just protects SMD components from getting knocked off by doing that. But the other thing is it has a 90-degree bend on the edge, on basically every single edge. There's a 90-degree bend on it, and that makes the backplate super freaking rigid. So, yeah, it's really great for just making the board much sturdier. Also, there's a relay on this board. It's right there. It clicks. So if you buy one of these and it's clicking every time it turns on and off, yeah, that's the relay over there. It's for something in the audio section. I've not really been paying much attention to it. It is kind of annoying. Well, I find it kind of annoying, but that's because, you know, I turn motherboards on and off a lot. If you're not constantly power cycling the board, then that honestly won't be, like, it doesn't click under normal, like, once the board is running, it doesn't click. It just clicks every time you power cycle it, so, yeah, but anyway, that's why the board makes a clicking noise. There's a relay in the audio section for something that I can't be bothered finding out more about, but I'm not sure if the Master has that. Actually, no, it doesn't, because I would have noticed it when I took the board out. Because, like, it's hard to miss that relay. It's white, it's big, and it's on the back. Like, if you look at the back, you're not going to miss that. So, yeah, the Master doesn't have that. Anyway, so that's the Aorus Extreme, which is basically an exercise in excess as far as motherboards are concerned. Let's move on to the Z5. So now let's do the ITX boards and then, well, the one ITX Aorus board, and then we'll do the Vision boards. So the Z590I Aorus Ultra. I'm really impressed with what they managed to pull off on this board, though I am not going to be reviewing one of these. Well, not going to be testing one of these in person. And the thing is, basically, I'm going to be testing the Extreme, the Master, the Pro, and the Elite, and then the board that isn't up on the website yet. And so I think that's 5 boards, and I don't really want to have more boards than 5 from Gigabyte for Z590. So yeah, so I'm not going to be doing an ITX board. So the thing is, but I'm still really impressed with what they managed on this board, because with the Z490 board, they put a 8+1 phase VRM, and that board was cramped, and I was like, there's no way you can fit more phases than that. Well, apparently you can, because this now has a 10+1 phase. Oh my god, the highlighting. Why does it do that? Oh no. There. Anyway, so yeah, this is on a 10+1 phase. Instead of an 8+1, so they somehow found space for 2 more phases on a board this packed. And the thing is, they've also managed to increase the amount of stuff in the rear I/O. Like, there's a lot of USB ports on here for an ITX board, and you still have Q-Flash, and 2.5 gig LAN and Wi-Fi 6. Though they've cut down on the number of audio ports, so I guess that's where they found the extra space. Yeah, basically this is the most packed ITX board there is, as far as I'm concerned. Like, it just kind of has everything. It has a 10-layer PCB. Unfortunately, the 10-layer PCB really doesn't do anything for memory overclocking on the ITX boards, or at least on a lot of ITX boards. It just doesn't really make much of a difference, because you need that high layer count just to get all the functionality onto the board. So it's like if you had an ATX board where you go up to a crazy number of layers, you can dedicate a lot of that just to making the memory overclocking better. Here, a lot of that is just kind of like, well, we wanted to have USB ports, so and SATA ports and all that stuff, and so yeah, we needed a lot of layers to connect all of the features that the motherboard is going to have. But anyway, like yeah, as far as ITX boards go, this is kind of like if I was actually interested in ITX boards due to them being small and not just because they tend to be pretty good at memory overclocking, this is really cool. It doesn't have troubleshooting LEDs. And that's kind of my main complaint on the Z490 one as well, is just like there's no troubleshooting LEDs, which makes sense because if you have an ITX board in an ITX build, you're probably not going to be able to see, 4 LEDs on the edge of it somewhere for troubleshooting purposes. But again, my main interest in ITX boards hasn't been the whole they're small. It's been they're kind of good at memory overclocking a lot of the time. And yeah, well, with the Z490 boards, that really didn't show up in my testing, and the lack of the troubleshooting LEDs was just annoying to deal with. So yeah, but hey, it like for like I'm not aware of a Z590 like another ITX board that manages to pack this much stuff, like both VRM wise and rear IO ports. This thing is just absolutely loaded. So I find this very impressive, but yeah, I'm not really an ITX motherboard person, right? Like I'm just kind of like a 2 DIMM slot, like 1 DIMM per channel kind of person, and ITX boards just happen to deliver on that a lot of the time. So anyway, yeah, but so I'm very impressed with this thing. But yeah, not really like not a board I'm actually going to be testing because Gigabyte is going to have a 1 DIMM per channel ATX board that I'm far more interested in. That's going to have all the overclocking features that don't fit on ITX boards. Anyway, moving on to the Vision lineup, let's start with the Vision G, and the Z590 Vision G is basically the same board as the Z490 Vision G, it just has different heat sinks now. I think they're a lot uglier, but some people might disagree with me on that. Like, I really think the chipset looks a lot worse than the Z490 version, but yeah, different heat sinks, it's very white. Like, I'm not really... Oh, I guess that's the thing. So this gives you Intel 2.5 gig LAN. It's going to be roughly the same price point as the Z590 Elite. And so I guess that's the main difference between that and this is just the 2.5 gig. Oh wait, this has 4 M.2 slots. Oh, right. Okay, so it wasn't just the Pro that does that. So that's the main, yeah, if you want a bunch of M.2 SSDs, well, this board offers the support for a bunch of M.2 SSDs. So that's what that's the main purpose of this. Well, that's an interesting upgrade over the Z490 version. Though I guess that's going to be kind of expensive. So this is probably going to be approaching the same price point as the Pro AX. I guess it's also going to have the same VRM as the Pro AX, though unfortunately Gigabyte does not mention that, I think. Yep, doesn't look like they mentioned that. Oh well, the thing is, this board's really meant for, like, creative people. People who actually edit their videos. So not me. Anyway, let's take a... Well, actually, there wasn't a single good picture of the rear I/O in the marketing materials, was there? So let's just go to the gallery. Yeah, so here's the rear I/O for it. Good number of USB ports. No Thunderbolts on this just yet, and there's your 2.5 gig. You do get a PS2 port, which is kind of interesting that they only put the PS2 port on the Vision boards and they don't put it on a lot of the like Aorus series boards. Because like there's people who still use PS2 keyboards. Like I know, like I have friends that use like IBM Model M's, which not really the kind of thing I would do, but like, hey, if they want to use that, right? It doesn't, like, the port doesn't hurt anything by existing, except I guess how many USB ports you can stuff into the rear I/O. Yeah, board still has troubleshooting LEDs. It still has Q flash. I assume it has the same memory topology as the Aorus boards. I wonder if they mention memory overclocking capabilities. Only what the CPU supports at stock. But I wouldn't like this should overclock memory about the same as at least the what is it? The Elite. There. So I would assume this should go up to 4800 quite easily. Because it doesn't look, this doesn't support ECC memory, so it's not like, so the fun fact, ECC memory support requires a different memory topology, and so if you have, like, if you don't have ECC support, well, so with like Gigabyte Z490 lineup, there was a difference in that some boards would have like there was one board with ECC support, and so it had significantly worse memory overclocking support because it was just like, well, it has the ECC layout, and it's just worse for max memory clock because of that. But yeah, so this board isn't doing that because it doesn't have ECC support. Anyway, moving on to the other Vision, we have the Vision D. And I'm guessing this also has the quad M.2s, or is this one like more PCIe slots focused? Yeah, so this one's more PCIe slot focused, right? You get X8, X8 support. Also, you'll notice the PCIe spacing is quite different. Watch out for your heatsink clearance, though, with this, because that first PCIe slot is right at the, like, it's in line with that first mounting hole. And on a lot of boards, like, that's not done. And the reason why it's not done is because who cares about multi-GPU support, right? But yeah, if you want the this layout is done for basically better multi-GPU support. Or more like better spacing between the GPUs, but the downside is now your first PCIe slot is closer to the CPU socket. So if you have a really big air cooler, you might have the big air cooler might actually hit the first PCIe slot, which something to keep in mind. Also, this gets a postcode. Q flash button, troubleshooting LEDs down there. But yeah, so this is the one more focused on having PCIe add-in cards instead of a bajillion M.2 slots. Yeah, so this one's on just triple M.2 instead of quad. I am really not a fan of this VRM heatsink. I realize most people find it very visually appealing, but that does not look like a heatsink. But anyway, the main highlight with this board, which we're apparently not going to see in the marketing materials, is the rear I/O. And I'm assuming the Z590 Vision D should be somewhere around the $300 to $350 mark. But yeah, the highlight here is dual 2.5 gig LAN and built-in Thunderbolt 4, and you actually have DisplayPort input, so you get display pass-through on these Thunderbolt 4 ports, which I don't believe you get on the Aorus Extreme, because I can't see a display input on this board, right? Like, if I'm not mistaken, there's no display input on this thing. Yeah, you have HDMI out, but you don't have display in. So display. Where's the display input? Because like on some boards you'll have like a display port hanging out in an awkward area above the PCIe slots, but it's just like I don't see anything like that anywhere on this board. I guess we should check the manual again, because that's the best way to get the useful information. Thunder. Okay. Right, so nope, that's not what I wanted to see. Connect supports standard DisplayPort Thunderbolt video outputs. You can connect a monitor to this connector with an adapter that can daisy chain. Yeah. No. I don't think there's a display input for that Thunderbolt port. Yeah, I am really not seeing a display in anywhere on the board. So I'm guessing this. So that's kind of the biggest difference, I guess, between the Ultra, I mean the Extreme and the Vision, is the Vision actually has a DisplayPort input, so you can pass through your dedicated GPU into the Thunderbolt 4 ports. Whereas I think on the Aorus Extreme, you'd just be stuck with the built-in, like the iGPU, because that's the only thing built directly. Like that should be the only GPU with a direct connection to the Thunderbolt ports. So that's kind of the difference there. So yeah, that's the main thing with this board is just you get this rear I/O with like the full-fledged Thunderbolt support. You also get the post code. And I think this is the same memory topology as all the other supports. Non-ECC support for ECC, but non-ECC mode. Yeah, so this looks like it's going to be the same memory topology as like the Z590 Ultra or the Pro or maybe the Elite again. So the memory overclocking support on this should be very strong as well. So yeah, but the main thing with this board is of course the rear I/O. I don't know what the VRM is on this. I kind of wish I knew, but at the same time, like this is again meant for people who actually do work with their systems instead of, and you know those people tend to care quite a bit more about stability than being right on the edge of their CPU's overclocking capability. So it like the VRM is probably not going to have to deal with as aggressive overclocks, even though it's probably going to have to deal with significantly longer periods of sustained load. There's kind of an interesting difference there, but yeah. Anyway, so basically if you want like full Thunderbolt support, that's the whole idea behind this board from Gigabyte. And then we get to the ITX Vision D. And this one, it's very simple. You get DisplayPort input on the rear I/O, and then you get 2 Thunderbolt ports on the rear I/O. So yeah, this is an ITX board with built-in Thunderbolt 4 again. You got Wi-Fi 6, 6 USB ports, Q flash button, same VRM that Gigabyte had on the Z490i Ultra. So this is an 8+1 phase, 90 amp smart power stages. So perfectly capable of running any CPU depending on how much airflow you give the VRM. Like there's no motherboard in Gigabyte Z590 lineup that won't be able to run a 11th gen or a 10th gen, 900K CPU with a maxed out overclock. It's just on some of them you might need some airflow, not a lot, just some. And the reason, like, because there's a difference between having a VRM that's so ridiculously overkill that it can run completely passive with no airflow whatsoever, and then having VRMs where it's like, yeah, if you actually have it in a case and there's some amount of air going through your case, then it'll run fine. So yeah. Anyway, so this being an ITX board, if you have like one of those downdraft ITX air coolers, then actually a lot of ITX cases are so cramped that there's always basically some fan that's going to be blowing somewhat directly on the board. So, yeah, like that's not really going to be a concern. Also, most ITX builds are super thermally limited, so the VRM on this is completely fine. Even though it's like the thing is the Z490 board was already fine, so it's not like the VRM is a concern, even though it is slightly weaker than what you would get on the ITX Ultra for Z590, not the Z490 Ultra, because that one was that was the same VRM. So yeah, this is like if you want Thunderbolt on an ITX board, then Gigabyte has this for that. So that's the whole idea behind this, and I have no idea what this is going to cost at all. I can't even guess. I have no idea because I don't know how much the Thunderbolt 4 chipset costs. But yeah, like if this is the kind of rear I/O you want on your ITX board, then this is certainly an option for that. So yeah, that's the Gigabyte Z590 motherboard lineup. I really like the Ultra. Like I really like the Ultra, especially since like there's a safe mode button now. It's like that just makes the board so much better. So yeah, this is I think the most balanced board in Gigabyte Z590 lineup. Then if you kind of want the then of course there's the Master, which just like the thing is the Master just doesn't like this makes way more sense in my opinion. Unless you need the 10 gig, this makes way more sense. And then if you love M.2 drives, then, you know, you've got the Vision G and you've got the Z590 Pro AX, depending on if you're... well, actually, overclocking-wise, these are very similar in terms of feature set, because the Pro AX doesn't have a postcode, right? This is the Pro AX, this is the Vision. Both are stuck with the 4 troubleshooting LEDs down here. Both have Q Flash. They probably both have the same VRM now that I look at it. Though this has slightly cheaper capacitors, and they could still have the weaker power stages under there, because, yeah, that wouldn't require a major redesign of the board to just switch the power stages. But, I prefer the rear I/O on this. So, yeah, so Gigabyte has a really, really, like, strong Z590 motherboard lineup. But I like the Ultra. I really, really like the Ultra. So, yeah. Anyway, that's it for the video. So I guess thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe, leave any comments, questions, suggestions down in the comment section below. If you'd like to support what I do here with actually hardcore overclocking, I have a Patreon. There's a link to that down in the description below. There's also the AHOC Teespring store where you can pick up shirts, stickers, posters, you know, the usual YouTuber merch. Both of those help out immensely with running the channel, so it'd be much appreciated if you'd check out the Patreon and the Teespring. And yeah, that's it for the video. So thank you for watching, and goodbye.